Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. For those that don't know me, my name is Edwina Blennon-Ferguson. I'm the Education Manager at Acorn. We have a very interesting webinar planned for you this Friday afternoon and would like to thank all of our viewers for taking the time to join us today. So this webinar aligns with our health and wellbeing education stream. And as part of our Acorn education plan, we wanted to ensure that we provided holistic perioperative education for all stages of our perioperative nurses' careers. And this is actually the last webinar of the year, so we felt like this was a fitting topic to discuss. Before we begin, I will share some housekeeping with you for today's session. We have allocated time at the end of the presentation for our presenter Trent to respond to any questions that our viewers may have. I encourage you to submit the questions through the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen at any time during the presentation. Acorn will be recording this presentation and access will be available after the event on the Acorn website. Certificates of attendance will be sent to you via the registration email that you provided. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our presenter for this afternoon, which is Trent Klein. Trent is a Senior Financial Advisor and Director at the Morton Group. The Morton Group offers a range of different financial services and specialise in retirement planning, and that is what we're most interested in today, is the planning of retirement for nurses. So sometimes the thought of retirement is a daunting one, or it may be a welcomed thought, but either way, professional advice is recommended before taking the leap. So Trent is here today to provide education on what that may look like. And as I mentioned, you can submit questions into the chat function as we go along, and Trent can answer these at the conclusion of the presentation. So I will now hand over to Trent, who will get the session going. Thank you, Trent.
Yeah, thank you, Edwina. As Edwina said, I'm a Senior Financial Advisor at the Morton Group. Just to get some housekeeping out of the way from my point of view, any information presented in the presentation is general in nature, doesn't take into account your specific circumstances. So don't act upon anything you see in here until you seek professional advice, read a PDS or a target market determination. If you want any more information on our privacy policies and information, that'll be available on our website. So the topics we're going to be covering today, there's a few of them. So what is retirement? When do you start retirement? How much do you need to retire is always a very, I guess, popular question. How that can translate to the nursing industry. I have a case study as well. And where does financial advice sit in that process overall? So we've been providing advice for retirement clients for over about 20 years. We're a second generation family financial planning company, so we have a lot of experience in this area. So probably the most common question I get is, what is retirement? So retirement is a lot of different things for a lot of different people. When clients come to us, they've usually got a question around, oh, I think I might want to retire. And generally the preconception is that retirement is finishing work altogether, when it can mean very different things. Now, our view of retirement is it's when you have the choice whether you go to work or not. And then what you do with that choice is up to you. I think the bigger question is, what does retirement look like to you individually? And then how do you execute that? And that may be a finish work and retire. What people consider normal retirement is stop work, don't work anymore. It can be a transition. It can be contracting. It can be part-time work. It can be volunteering. And there's different ways to marry up the money that you have and what you've saved for retirement and continual work and bringing those two things together. So I think the question is, retirement doesn't have to be a all or nothing. It can be a little bit of both. It can be some existing work. It can be taking extra time. It can be doing different things. So it really comes down to, it's that choice of what to do. So the next one, we want to say, when to start retiring, or what are the benefits of starting retirement planning? So the biggest thing is, no matter what stage in your life you are at, it's never too late to start looking at, planning for your retirement, because there may be opportunities you haven't even thought of. But it's always better to start at least looking at it and thinking about it and talking about it as early as you can. because the more time you have starting earlier, it just gives you a bit more flexibility. You know, if you want to go on different holidays, you're more likely to be able to, you know, do different things, stay different places, go different areas. It doesn't mean that you know, nothing is fixed in retirement. It's very, very flexible. We find that a big trigger is health. So people have a health scare, have someone who has a health scare, someone who passes away prematurely. I mean, you would all see that better than I do. And then what that means is that when people have a health scare, it can limit them in their options because they maybe haven't thought about it earlier. If they've started planning a little bit earlier, it does mean that you have the ability to adapt and change to that. So if you've got a plan, and plans are always flexible, if you have a process in place and you have ideas of what you're able to do at different times, it means dealing with those things tends to be a little bit easier. The other main benefit is mentally. So we find that people who mentally prepare for retirement and have an idea about what they can do in retirement and what is possible for them tend to have a better transition into retirement. You know, the old, oh, I think I need to retire, and then sort of people go, well, am I going to be left sitting there? What am I going to be doing? The longer you can lead up to that, the better prepared mentally you are. Therefore, the more you tend to get out of retirement, the more you enjoy it, the more you have the confidence to be able to do the things you want to do. I mean, when you think about it, retirement is a very, very big transition, probably one of the biggest of your life, which may seem a little bit silly, but I mean, if you look at compared to coming out of school, you came out of school, you had an idea of what you wanted to do, you knew you were going to work or go to university or do these things. Now there's been changes along the way, but you had a general idea where you were headed. Retirement can be a little bit different for a lot of people. It can mean that people aren't necessarily as prepared for what's to come, or it's that great unknown. And that can be a bit scary, or at least a little bit unsettling for people. So we always encourage people, the more you can think about it, the more time you give yourself to get used to it, the better off you're going to be, because it doesn't mean you get to retirement and all of a sudden you go, well, I don't know what I'm going to do. What do I do? How do I do it? If you've thought about those questions, even if you haven't got all the answers, it just makes you more comfortable. Therefore, it makes you more confident, and therefore you can go out and enjoy your retirement a lot more. I find with my clients, the ones who have had a little bit of time to, you know, haven't come to see us like going, I want to retire tomorrow. I mean, that's always possible, and we deal with that. But if they're going, I think I want to retire in a certain time period, they tend to have a better idea of what they want to do and live a little bit more fulfilling sort of retirement, especially in the early stages, and have more confidence to go out and do things. So that's really a big one. And then the other benefit of starting retirement planning early and just starting is knowledge. Knowledge is power, as they say, but it's knowing what's possible, and it gives you a sense of security and confidence in your workplace as well. So one of the benefits of starting thinking about retirement and knowing if it's possible for yourself is that it may give you the confidence to be able to go to work and say, look, this is what I'm thinking. I'd like to make this transition. And knowing that you've got the ability to retire if you need to, it just makes things, I guess, much more pleasant. It gives you a level of confidence. And we find that people tend to be happier in their jobs after that as well. You know, it can be to retire straight away, or it can be that, you know, you actually start enjoying your work more because you're there by choice rather than by a sense of you need to do this or you have to be there. So one of the big ones you get with people, or we find with people, is that they go along, they maybe talk to their employer about retirement, but they're not 100% sure whether they can actually do it. So they sort of approach it in a way that maybe doesn't give them the best outcome. So having that knowledge on, yes, I can retire, really helps you go to your employer and have those conversations from, I guess, a position of strength to some degree, but just calmness and confidence. when we talk to, I find with a lot of my clients who I talk to the first time, it's always, oh, I think I'll retire in 3 to 4 to 5 years. And normally where we tend to start is we go, okay, well, that's great, but what would happen if you were to retire now? What does that look like? And if the answer is, well, if this is what you want in retirement and this is how you can do it, and the answer is you can retire, it just provides you with that, I guess, sense of control over where you're headed, rather than sort of sitting there and just going, oh, you know what, maybe I can retire, maybe I can't. Because there's a lot of information out there which, and quite a lot of it is a little bit, maybe scaremongering, but just a bit of misinformation. Is the old, you know, people have to work till they're 70 or 75, or you need $1 million to retirement. So the next one is, the big one is, how much do I need to retire? So there's a bit of research around on this. The Australian Super Fund Association, which is a combination of all the different super funds, industry funds, retail funds, they all get together and they've created an industry association. They don't make comments on products and all this sort of thing. They're just there to do research on super and retirement and how it works. So they do surveys of costs of living updated twice a year, and you can find it on their website, which is the bottom of the slide. And they come up with a comfortability standard or retirement standard. So the minimum, the annual cost of a comfortable retirement, they project out to be, for singles, about 45, just over 45,000. Couples about 63, 64. So that gets updated every quarter or every 6 months in line with the increase of costs. And that's been going around since 2004. So the ASFA site is a really good, if you're looking for information, is a really good site that has a lot of information on retirement and things like this. So what that means is there's a brief description there you can see on your screen. It's got things like what does it include, like, you know, council rates, water, electricity, holidays, and things like that. Now they have a detailed breakdown of what this equates to per year in every little subsector. So if you're more interested in that sort of stuff, but it's more of a overview of, this is around about what people will spend in retirement. Remember, this is after tax too, so it doesn't take into account, you know, it's not like, oh, I have to earn, you know, $80,000 or $90,000 a year. This is assuming this is after tax dollars. And when you're talking superannuation and things like that, there are a lot of mechanisms, depending on your age, to draw tax-free income a lot of the time. So that tends to be $64,000 is $64,000, not I have to earn $80,000 or $85,000 to make that, just depending where your money is structured, of course. In my experience, that couples figure, they've got a couple of extra figures there. I'll show you on the next slide. So they have a modest lifestyle as well for a single and a couple. And all this assumes that you own your own home, or you don't have to pay for housing. If you're renting or you don't own your own house, that's an extra cost on top of that. These are simply living expenses. So you can see there, this is for up to 65 to 85-year-olds, comfortable lifestyle for a single, 55.2, couple, 63.8. Modest lifestyle, 28.7, 41.5 for a couple. So modest, when you're talking about that, is your basic sort of needs of living. It's not a lot of any extras. It's not a lot of going out to dinners and things like that. In my experience, most of my clients usually sit somewhere between about 50 to 60, 65. That would be my large experience on where people come in, or it may be a case where their regular living might be about 50 to 52,000 a year, and then they might put holidays on top of that. So it does depend on how many holidays you actually have and things like that as to how much that will be. But that is usually around about what people spend. You know, I don't have too many spending less than, as a couple or a single, spending less than sort of 40,000, but neither do I have people spending, you know, 80, 100, 200,000. It really just depends. What I will say in my experience, and this tends to be evident in data as well, is that people tend to spend more in the initial stages of their retirement. So your first, you know, 10, 15 years, when you're more active, you know, you might go on overseas holidays or larger interstate holidays. Whereas when you get into your, you know, late 70s, 80s, you don't tend to do those things. You don't tend to go out quite as much or spend the same amount of money that you do early in retirement. And indeed, a lot of the time when I'm having conversations with clients around what do they do in their retirement and how much do they spend, what I find is we usually encourage them to spend more, especially early. Because while when we're doing projections out, we're showing their spending increasing, in reality, it probably increases for the first 10 years, and then it tends to drop down a little bit. So contrary to most thoughts, most of my time with my clients is actually trying to encourage them to spend a bit more and do a few more things, and that it'll be okay to do those sort of things. Because really, you never know when health is going to become a factor. You never know what you're going to be able to do in retirement. Therefore, enjoying the time you have initially, obviously without going crazy and sacrificing everything in the future, but that is a very big component, and there's a lot of the work we do is encouraging people and giving them confidence that they can actually go and enjoy their retirement and do the things they want to do. So that tends to be a common one. What that equates to in super savings, now this is a calculation that ASFA have done with some assumptions that are available on their website. But they say that for a couple on $64,000 a year, they would need about $640,000 in retirement savings to meet that full life expectancy. For a single to do 45, it's about $545,000. So that takes into account, their calculations take into account things like age pension eligibility, which is obviously a big one, as well as certain investment earnings and things like that. And once you hit 85, you can see down the bottom of the screen there, you can see that those amounts come down a little bit for a comfortable 42.8, a modest, a single comfortable 42.8, a couple comfortable about 60,000. So you can see that those spendings as you get older do decrease a little bit. Obviously, health is the biggest wild card. You would all know the best. Health can affect that as well, can have a big effect on the money you spend in retirement and things like that. But yeah, so that is I guess the largest thing around how much do you need to retire. That is a bit of a guideline. I mean, it's not perfect, and different circumstances will be very, very different, but it does put to bed that whole, we need $1 million to retire. And to be honest, the majority of my clients would not be retiring on $1 million. There would be some, but there would be many who retire with far less than $1 million. And probably many who retire with less than 640,000, to be perfectly honest. So how much you need to retire is a very individualistic thing, but there are some sort of common themes that we see, and it's definitely not $1 million. So if you have been sitting there and concerned about, oh my goodness, we're going to need $1 million to retire, how are we ever going to get there? Take a deep breath and relax a little bit, because it's just not the case. And it hasn't been our experience at all in the 20 odd years I've been in financial advice. So yes, you can relax a little bit there. The other things, the variables are there as to how much that dollar figure is, has things like, okay, if you have a partner, what are your age differences? Can you access different government incentives at different times? I was having a chat with a client the other day, and they are looking to retire. They're not of age pension age. And they are looking to retire, but still want to be active in their community. So one of the things that you can access is if you're happy to do some volunteering and you're retiring before 67 years of age, you can access what they call Job Seeker. But if you're over 60 years of age, you don't need to meet the searching for work tests. So if you've got a drive to volunteer and your assets and things like that are structured in certain ways, then you do have the ability to apply for a job seeker payment, do some volunteering in the community and receive that as well. Now, when you combine that with assets and different things like that, it means that maybe you don't have to wait till age pension age to get age pension. You can still access things like government payments. So those things all come together to give you an idea of what you can do in retirement. There's lots of different options that you can access and different entitlements, healthcare cards, all these sorts of things, which can help lower the cost or help supplement income, which means you don't have to wait till age pension age to retire. In fact, we probably have more clients retiring before age pension age than we do waiting till 67, which is when most people become eligible. That date is changes a little bit depending on when you were born. And then all those figures then change how much you need to retire, because if you can get $10,000 or $12,000 of that per year in extra entitlements, that makes a big difference to how much do I need in retirement. Okay. So there's just a summary of all those questions: retirement age, living standards, health. They're all those factors that are going to affect how retirement goes for you and what retirement looks like for each individual person. How does that apply to nurses? In general, nurses can tend to be in good positions for this because there is capability to work part-time or casually. I understand perio nursing is a little bit different in the fact that it is highly specialised, and shifts tend to be long and it tends to be quite physical. And not everyone has the option to go into an education or a training role or anything like that. But if you approach it and know that you could retire or you have the ability to meet your retirement income in different ways, it can give you the position to, maybe you can go casual work, whether that's an option as well, and enables you to approach your, the people in charge of your area with the ability to have a bit more confidence and go, okay, look, this is what I'd like to do. And this is sort of my time frame for doing it. Can we work together to create an outcome? Because I'd imagine with this, by the time you're getting to retirement, the knowledge and specialty that you would all have would be extensive. So in most cases, I found that employers are more than willing to work with you on a plan to get you to retirement if they can stage that rather than losing you for good, because you've got that knowledge, you've been doing it a long time, you're highly specialised, and that is really, really hard to replace. There's no substitute for doing something for a long time and being really good at it. So usually there are mechanisms there, and most employers, in my experience anyway, will tend to be very, are willing to work with you, especially if you come going, this is my plan, this is what I'd like to do. I can do it sooner if I need to, but this is what I'm thinking. And it just allows you a bit of flexibility there and the ability to transition a little bit easier into retirement. So that's what, that's probably the advantage that I think in general nursing has. I know it's a bit different with perio nursing and that sort of thing, in the fact that maybe it's not as easy when you've been specialising so much to transition into a more general role. But usually having that knowledge and that confidence helps you go back to employers and have a really honest chat to them about what you want to achieve. And usually most of them are going to be very facilitative of that, just because they don't want to lose what you have and your experience straight away. So I've done a bit of a case study here as well, just to show you what I was talking about with retirement amounts and retirement incomes and things like that. So this is an actual client. Obviously, I've changed their name. It's actually a nurse. I didn't make up. There was a not a perio nurse, but a client of mine whose children, whose daughter was actually a client, and she referred her parents because her mum was 63, was really wanting to look to retire. Her dad wasn't. He was a boat repairer, and he, when I first met them, very much went, oh no, look, I don't want to retire. I'll work for another couple of years. So Jenny had a balance of 301,000. John had a balance of 238. So that 540, 600 sort of area. It's around about what we were talking about. Their retirement income, they thought maybe about 57. They added up a few costs and decided that that was what they wanted to target. Now, when we're doing these projections, we tend to stress test these pretty well. We'll put in different amounts, show what effect, drawing out lump sums for different things has. And what you end up with is this graph. So what we've got here in the green column is the income, which is on the right-hand side, which was that sort of 57, and that's been indexed up for inflation. So we always do that when we project out. We always index the increase of cost. Now, as I said before, that doesn't always really happen in a nice linear fashion. But if the costs aren't as great over the long term, then that just gives a little bit of extra wiggle room. And the assets here, you can see that with a little bit of cash and things like that, they probably started close to about a bit under 600,000. And initially, they're going to draw all of their income, their 57, down from their accounts. Now, over time, when they both become eligible for age pension, or one of them does, that'll kick in and that will meet some of their requirements. So age pension, full age pension at the moment is about, if you're in a couple, is about $19,000 each per annum. A little bit more, it varies over different time periods. Single is about 24, 25. So these projections take into account all of that. But as you can see here, this blue line, which is their asset line, obviously goes down initially, but then as more and more of their income is supplemented from things like age pension and things like that, it tends to plateau out a little bit. Because the important thing to remember when you retire is people tend to go, well, I need 50 grand a year, I've got 500, I'm going to draw down 50 grand a year and it's all going to be gone in 10 years. When that's not really the case, the important thing to remember is that when you retire, there's only a small portion of that money is for now. Hopefully more of that money is for the future than there is for right now. And it's therefore important to make sure that you invest in certain ways that mean that some money is for the now and some money is growing for the future, because that's going to increase the time that money is going to last. And it means that in the future, if you do have extra money, it just does buy you flexibility and options later in retirement. If things pop up that are, not planned, which there always is, you've got the ability to be flexible and adapt. So that was just a bit of a live example. That's actually out of that chart is one we use in client presentations. That's not a made-up figure. I literally took it out of their projections with obviously a few different little details that are changed here and there. So yeah, the next one I had was why, what is the value of getting advice? So seeing a financial advisor, I think, is valuable. Obviously, I do it as a career. There are different financial advisors, though. There's ones that specialize in insurance. There's ones that specialize in, picking stocks and things like that. I always believe it's good to find one that specializes in retirement because financial planning is such a broad spectrum of different people. It can go from share trading, stockbrokers, through to just insurance brokers. So finding someone who tends to specialize in retirement planning and is going to be aware of those different things that are on offer available to you, I think is very, very important. I think getting started and having an initial plan is extremely valuable, but so is having ongoing advice. The reason that is that rules change all the time. For example, once you're not working and you're over 67, you can't make any further super contributions. Now, that legislation is proposed to change next year. So I've got a number of clients who have significant assets outside of superannuation that maybe they're paying a little bit of tax on and things like that, that they now have the option to move into the superannuation environment because even in their 70s, to preserve and grow for the future, pay a little bit less tax and things like that. So that's one area where having ongoing advice, someone to monitor your situation and making sure that you're getting the most out of all the rule changes. The other one is making sure these plans come to fruition. The biggest risk at the moment is longevity risk. People are living longer. People are at risk of outliving their money if it's not monitored and invested in the correct way. So that's a really big part of what we do for clients, is making sure that they can go about living their lives without wondering, is my money going to be there in the end? That's our job. That's what a financial advisor does. Now, the tools they use is, super, investments, all these different tools. Really, what we're trying to do for clients is to make sure that this is what I want to achieve, this is my retirement plan, how do we make that happen? And all the bits and pieces that we use, all the different legislation, allowances that are in there, things like downsizing your home and contributing to super is always a big one. There is government allowances that you can do that outside of other limits. There's catching up from previous years' deductible contributions to save on tax. There's not repaying your home loan as quickly and diverting that into areas that are going to save you tax as well. All these things are levers that you can use to enhance your retirement outcomes. Okay. And I guess the big question is, where do you start? The fact that you're here looking at this presentation is probably the biggest one. There are some good resources out there, and I've got a bit on the next slide. ASFA, the Australian Super Fund Association, have a Super Guru page. It's in the bottom of some of these slides. It is a very good resource that has some really good calculators on the different things you need to think about in retirement. The government have a Money Smart site as well, which has a lot of information. There's a lot of information out there, and realistically, if you read through it all, you could probably convert it into most of a plan to retire. The difference is it's information. Unfortunately, it's not answers to a lot of these things. And it's also not specific to your situation. So there will be cases where you read information that you may feel applicable, but it won't actually be applicable to your situation because there are a lot of little rules and nuances and things like that. But all the information is essentially there. So if you want to go read through it and have a really good understanding, look, I always encourage people to know enough to know and seek information, because it is going to give you a really good outcome, even if you then go seek professional advice. Because we find that the more we educate clients on the things that we do and why we do them, the more they tend to value, the more they tend to understand, the more comfortable they tend to be. So I really encourage you, even if you're going to seek professional advice in financial planning, that you do some research, some education, and seek information off that professional if you do decide to go down that path as well. They should be able to provide you with as much information as you want. There's no hiding behind mirrors and there's no tricks and secrets. I think the value in advice is the information they provide, which provides a sense of security. So there's lots of other areas around retirement that you need to think of as well. Things like, what if something happens to me? What if something happens to my partner? How money flows between you? How does it go to if you have children or things like that, or directed to wherever you want money to go to if something were to happen to you? There are other pieces that need to be considered, and there's lots of different outcomes from a tax point of view if you don't necessarily have them structured the right way as well. So that's sort of another layer that a good advisor can help you with. So I think we're at about sort of time from there. Are there any questions that anyone had there about anything that we've covered off in the presentation?
So I'll just remind everyone you can pop them into the chat function. But I suppose one thing that I was thinking while you were chatting there is, if somebody went, you know what, I think it's time to start planning, I would like to go see a professional about it and get some advice, whether it's you guys or somewhere else. What I guess are some things to have ready to take to those type of advice or appointments? Do you have any advice on things to, I guess, have at the ready, or information to access beforehand that can maybe inform or make the most of that first appointment with somebody?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, the more information you can have on hand about your financial situation, the better, because that saves time. There's a lot of collecting of data that goes into a first meeting, and that if you spend too much time or there's too much missing data there, you don't tend to get the value out of that first appointment that you normally would. So the more information you can have on hand, whether that be, your assets, your liabilities, how much you're paying on loans if you've got them, where your super is, a recent statement and things like that. And then also spend a little bit of time thinking about, ideally, if I could have the choice to do whatever I wanted to tomorrow, what would that look like? taking away all your preconceptions, but if the person across the other desk was to say to you, yeah, you can retire tomorrow, would you want that? Is that an outcome you would like? You know, how much do you think you would need? The more thought you can give it to beforehand, the more questions you'll have, the more information, the more someone will be able to get, you know, help you get more out of that appointment. So rather than, you know, sort of just taking a bunch of data or having, you know, oh, I don't know that figure or I'm not sure about that, a good advisor or a good professional will be able to look at a situation and have a bit of an idea and have a line of questions that they can ask that will help them sort of eke out really what your goals and things out, so you can get the most out of that initial appointment. That would definitely be a recommendation from me. It's always easier the more people have when they come to me, the more we can really dive deep into sort of what that looks like. Therefore, the more information they can get out of it, which is always beneficial.
Awesome, thank you. We've got a question here. If you are over your preservation age but under 60 and want to retire, how can you minimise tax? I don't know if that's one for a public forum. That's okay.
No, that's all right. It's more of a general question. So if you're under preservation, if you're over preservation age is when you can access your super. So now for a lot of people it's 60, but if you're born over, it used to be 55 and it's been slowly transitioning up to 60. Now super, when you draw it down as a pension or a regular payment to meet your lifestyle expenses, if you're over 60, that's tax-free. If you're under 60, part of it gets added to your taxable income. Now, there are tax offsets that are associated with that. So it really depends how much you're drawing down from there, what other income sources you have. You know, if you've got assets outside, if you've got a rental property or something and that's giving you a taxable income, then what you're drawing down from your super fund may add to that. There are different ways to be able to manage that. It does come with tax offsets. So a lot of the time, if you're under your preservation age, yes, you might create a taxable income, but a lot of the times that's quite offset. So you can, and then you can balance that between drawing regular income payments, drawing lump sums are taxed a little bit differently in those circumstances as well. So there might be a combination where you draw a regular income of this, and then every so often you take a lump sum of this. So there are possibilities that, depending on your circumstances, can be things that you can look at to basically minimise tax or pay no tax, just depending on how much you're drawing down. So yeah, certainly you're able to look at that as an option.
Awesome, yeah. Thank you. Another question about how early, and you said it was never too late to start this planning, but how early do people recommend, or professionals recommend, that you start this process or thinking about it?
Yeah, I mean, look, everyone's going to say, it's never too early. But being realistic is that if you're going through a stage of life like myself, I've got a young child and things like that, you're probably not really thinking about retirement. And to be honest, your capacity to do something about that is probably limited. Having an idea where your super is invested, what it's invested in, is it in growth assets, is it in defensive assets, is it growing for the long term, is probably a good place to start there. If you can make extra contributions and things like that, that's always a good option to explore. Once the most common, there's a couple of trigger points. One is when kids start moving out of house, although that's happening later and later these days. But when things like school fees and a lot of the expenses of that tend to disappear, people tend to have a little bit more disposable income. And that's a really good time to start planning, because you don't have to contribute as much, you don't have to put aside as much to retirement planning. It can be a bit more gradual, because at the end of the day, at that stage, you might want to do some things for yourself, which we always encourage. So starting it then is always a really good starting point. The earlier you can is always the answer, but it's not the end of the world. If you're thinking about retirement right now, I've had cases in the last 12 months where I've saw a client for a first appointment. They were thinking of retirement in a few years. I sort of asked them the question, well, you could probably retire. I'll do the analysis. Is there a reason why you're not doing it right, or you don't want to do it sooner? And then I came back for the second appointment with a bunch of analysis and paperwork, and they had sold their house and were moving interstate. Now that's a fairly extreme example, but so it's never, but it shows that it's never too late to start thinking about it, and to look at, okay, you know, can I retire? So, yeah.
Now, one of the questions about super, is it sort of recommended that all, and again, I don't know whether this is something for this forum, but is it something that's recommended that, you know, I guess all the supers get rolled into one, or is there any benefit in having multiple different types of super funds going?
Look, there can be benefit for consolidating your super, for sure. There are certain fixed costs like account fees and things like that, that if you've got multiple supers are a duplication. A lot of the fees tend to be from an investment management point of view, and a lot of even administration fees tend to be percentage based. So it's not quite as big a thing as it sometimes has been made out to be. The important thing when consolidating your superannuation or looking at that is quite often the biggest one is insurance. Because if you've got insurance in one superannuation fund and you need that insurance, and then you want to roll it over and consolidate it to others, that insurance doesn't transfer across. That will cease. So it's important to understand whether you need that insurance, how much it is, what it's providing. And then the other important thing is to make sure that wherever you're rolling it to is invested in a way that's going to provide, is invested in different areas that is appropriate for you and your stage of life. So, you know, when you're younger, the common themes are people go, well, invest in as much growth as you can because you can't touch it for X number of years and you've got a long time. As people get closer to retirement, that necessarily isn't true, but neither is it the case that you need all of your money as soon as you retire. Therefore, that's sometimes a thing that people make a little bit of a mistake in, but there's nothing wrong with consolidating your super, and having it all in one place can just be an easy thing from tracking it. If you are wondering, have I got any other super funds out there that I don't know, you can access that information through the your MyGov portal. If you go onto the ATO, if you've got that linked in, it has a list of all the super funds that you have on there and how much roughly at different stages is invested in. I think they update it once every financial year or every 6 months, but that's a good start to see if you've got where you have super. So certainly consolidation is something that can provide a benefit. There's just a few things to be aware of when you're doing that as well.
Perfect, thank you. Now, if we haven't got any more questions, I'll just give it a couple more minutes, but thank you for the insight of what a few different versions of retirement can look like as well, because I think I'm probably prone, not that I'm planning my retirement just yet, but you know, you often just think retirement, stop work, that's sort of it. So yeah. I think having a gradual approach is a good way as well, and really planning it out and making all the considerations in advance. You're right, it does give you that confidence, I suppose, to then have those conversations with managers or wherever you're working about what that retirement process could look like, and it's possibly not as daunting as originally thought as well.
Yeah, I definitely think that's the key. We find that with a lot of people, like when we see them, they go, oh, that doesn't seem as difficult or as they thought it was going to be. A lot of people are sometimes a little bit, they don't tend to approach it because they think they're going to get a negative answer. I've told far more people in my career that they can retire earlier than they thought than I've ever said. I don't know if I've ever said, no, you have to keep working longer. I don't think it's ever been the case. Most of the time it's, no, if you want to retire, we can make that happen. You could retire now if you wanted to. Look, it's never always going to be 100% the case, but it's by far more often, it's the former than the latter. So I encourage people to think about it. It's not as scary as maybe it's been made out to sound from a financial point of view, especially, as maybe has been perpetrated in different sections of the media or, you know, publications or the general consensus that people seem to think about. So yeah, so I'd encourage people to start having a think about it. That's for sure.
Yeah, perfect. All right, well, it doesn't look like we have any more questions. So on behalf of Acorn, I'd like to thank Trent for his insight and his time today, and also thank you to all of our participants for attending. I hope you have a lovely weekend ahead and happy retirement planning. Hopefully you've got some inspiration today to gather some things together and perhaps go and see someone about it. Hopefully you're not all going to leave having a look at the attendance list. I'm hoping you're not all going to suddenly retire on us. Make it a gradual approach. But we look forward to seeing you at our webinars next year. So thank you again to Trent, and thank you again to all of our participants. Thank you.